Nobody talks about you, then you are nobody. Then you are nobody. Remember, child, everybody get that problem for head.
When creating your grimoire or book of shadows, you want to think about who is going to be in possession of your book once you transition. Are you creating this book as a family heirloom? Is it something that you will leave to your heirs? Are you going to leave it to them in general and let them decide who takes custody of it? Or are you going to leave it to a specific person? These are all things that you must consider and you need to make arrangements for. I mean, honestly, if you have children and you are creating a book of shadows and you have, or a grimoire, and you know which one of your children is more spiritually inclined, or if you have a child that may be more responsible, or if you have a child, a niece or a nephew who is a natural archivist and keeps up with things and loves, sentimentality and souvenirs, you may consider leaving it to that person. You just need to know in whose hands you are going to leave this very, very valuable body of work. It's something that you must consider from the start when you are creating your book of shadows or your grimoire. Understand that this is going to be your magical and spiritual legacy. This is going to be a way for people to get to know you. There is also an aspect that you should consider about leaving a grimoire or a book of shadows, and that is the fact that it will continue to feed your spirit and to power you once you have transitioned as people work with this book, as they work with your work, as they interact with the ashe that you will be leaving on the pages of this book. They may even consider setting up altars to you. This is something that you may even prescribe in the book. If there's a particular work that you have done that you've been very successful at, you may leave instructions for them to do a particular thing to call forth your energy or call forth your spirit to assist them. You may leave directions for how you want to be fed and handled once you transition, certain offerings that you may want, and things of that nature. So you really have to put a lot of thought into the creation of your grimoire and the legacy that you're creating and the instructions that you're leaving behind for those who are going to come after you. You want to think about what is the purpose of your grimoire. Is it simply a collection of information that you want to leave as a legacy or as your magnum opus, your life's work, in other words? Is it a teaching tool? Are you expecting those that come behind you to learn the craft from what you leave them? Not only that, is it a tool that you are going to be using to teach your children or those that you come in contact with today? Is it something that you're going to work with and share with others? Or is it something that's going to be more private that you plan to leave as a legacy? These are all things that you need to consider when creating your book of shadows or your grimoire. Is this something that you're going to share publicly? Meaning, will you publish it as a book on the open market? Will you use it to teach classes? Will you share it with people outside of your bloodline and outside of your family? Will you have students and work from your grimoire? These are all things that you need to consider. You also need to think about how you will use the book. Is it simply going to be something that where you record your work and then you put it away? Or is it going to be a tool that you work from? Are you going to use your grimoire as a reference book when you need to know a particular piece of information? Will it be your grimoire that you go to, or will you use other research methods? If you are going to use it as a working book, then will it have diagrams in it? Will it have places for you to place your tools and to actually set up an altar, because you can actually use your grimoire as an altar with places to put your candles and places to put your tools and the incantations or affirmations written in a particular spot. These are all things that you need to consider when creating and mapping out your grimoire. You need to think about whether your grimoire is something that you're going to take with you when you travel, that you're going to take out into the world as you are moving through life. Will you travel with it? Will you take it with you when you go to religious or spiritual meetings? If you belong to a coven, will you be taking your grimoire with you to those events or meetings? Or is it something that is going to live at your house? If you're creating a book of shadows and you journal, you may want to take that with you. So you may want to purchase a book of a smaller size or create a book of a smaller size. What are the materials that you're going to use? If your book is going to be stationary, or if it's going to stay in your home or your temple or your sacred space, then you have a lot more freedom with the type of materials that you can use. You can use a book that may be bound with metal or have a metal cover. You can use a book that is a larger size. For example, this would be an example of a book, a grimoire that's meant to be more stationary. This is far too large to carry around as you move through the city or move through life. However, a smaller book like this would be perfect to drop in your purse or your work bag, and to journal on the go and record your experiences as you move around. So these are things that you need to consider: the size of your book, the material that it's made out of. How heavy is it going to be? How delicate is it? If you're going to use your grimoire as a teaching aid, you definitely want to consider a type of flexible binding that's going to allow you to add pages and remove pages easily. For this type of book, you may want to consider a 3-ring binder that may have a different type of cover on it, something more decorative or unique that you add to it. There are many different types of binding systems, and you can research those to find out which one is best for you. But if you're going to be using your grimoire to teach from or to share with others, a flexible binding where you're able to add and remove pages is definitely advisable. If you're creating a book of shadows and privacy is a concern, then you want to think about possibly having a book with a lock on it. There are books that have different types of latches that close in a particular way that can be locked for added privacy. You can have a simple lock with a key or a combination lock. These are all things that you want to consider if you are really trying to keep the privacy and confidentiality of the information inside your book of shadows. It's kind of an interesting thing, thinking about your transition and thinking about how people are going to handle your stuff. But did you guys really hear what I said about leaving instructions for how you want to be conjured yourself when you're a spirit, how you want to be treated as an ancestor, the types of offerings that you want, the type of work that you're willing to do? It's like, listen, don't y'all call me for no bullshit. Call me when you need X, Y, and Z. Give me this type of drink. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to respond to. You can actually leave all of these instructions. These are things that you can decide right now. Think about the power of that, and think about the power of being able to share that information with your children and with those people coming behind you. You can tell them, like, listen, if you say, and so this, okay, so now we're getting into the stuff. This is where the passwords come in. Okay. Remember at the beginning, I talked about passwords and secret words, and I talked about activation words. You can decide what those are. Okay, you can decide what, because you don't die when you die. Y'all know that, right? Spirits are not dead. They just don't have bodies no more. You will still have some level of consciousness. You will still be able to, what am I doing right now? Okay. Y'all give me a second. I got too carried away trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. The audacity. But this is really some powerful stuff, is what I'm trying to tell you. Because you get to think about how you are going to be approached as an ancestor. You get to think about what your role as an ancestor is going to be, and so on and so forth. And how you are going to interact with and help your descendants. Passwords. That's what I'm saying, you guys. This is so powerful what we're doing. And so you got to know, you got to understand that there's a reason why we were separated from these traditions, that there's a reason why they didn't want us recording certain things and having the ability to share certain things and to pass information down. You guys have to understand that by now. You get what I'm saying? Passwords. Imagine that your descendants can just say a word and here you come to the rescue, guns blazing, with the Orisha at your side. Okay. Do you think our ancestors that were captured had time to discourse? So listen, they didn't have to destroy their grimoires. They destroyed them for them. And what they didn't destroy, they stole. You understand? And I'm talking about the ancient grimoires of, like you guys have heard about the burning of the library in Alexandria, Egypt, where they literally burned down the whole damn library. They stole what they wanted, but they burnt down the rest. There are so many ancient African texts that are housed in the Vatican right now. The Catholic Church is one of the biggest thieves on the planet. They have so much of our history and so much information intact. Okay, fully intact. Like they know exactly who we are, what we're capable of, what we've done, and they keep it under lock and key. I actually went to a Jesuit university, and we had one of the most exhaustive religious libraries in the country. The university that I went to, where I studied theology, and that library was guarded. You guys, that library was guarded like a bank. You would think that they were printing money in there. And we only had a small fraction of what they have at the Vatican. You had to have ID and passes and escorts to get to different floors in the library because of the nature of the information, the stolen information that they had in there. Because believe me, they had stuff from all over the world. That's what they've done. That's what actually the Bible and Christianity itself is a collection of religious doctrine and spiritual belief systems that they put together and forced upon the world. But I digress. So now that we know the difference between a grimoire and a book of shadows, and we know some of the types of information that goes into each one, let's talk specifically about the setup of the book. What sections will you have in your grimoire? Will your book open with a book blessing? And is this something that you're actually going to record and have as part of the book itself? And if so, is it something that you're going to compose yourself? Or is it a prayer that you'll find from another source? Will your book have a dedication? And if so, who are you going to dedicate the book to? Will it be your heirs? Will it be all of humanity? Will it be a family friend? Will it be someone who is a member of your coven or temple? These are things that you need to consider. How do you want your book handled after your transition? Do you want it to be burned? Do you want it to be buried? Leave it to a person? Is it something that you want to donate to a magazine? Is it something that you want to donate to a university or a school or a museum? These are things that you need to consider. Your book should absolutely have a table of contents. The table of contents, and remember that this is a living work. This is a living body of work. It's something that will continue to grow and change. So your table of contents should be flexible, as should the entire book itself, but you should have an idea of the sections or larger headings that you are going to include in your book. For example, are you going to have a section that's devoted to herbs, both magical and medicinal? Or will you divide those sections and have a magical herb section and a medicinal herb section, as opposed to having just one large herb section? Will you have a section on divination, and will it record the readings that you do? Or will it just discuss the method that you use? Will it have examples of the tools that you use? Or will it have a detailed description of how to create those tools and how to use them? Will you have a section on tools? What are your magical tools? Are they tools that you create yourself? Are they tools that you purchase? Are they tools that you find? Will you have a section that addresses your tools, how to use them, how to create them? And if you create your own tools, will you include pictures, instructions, detailed explanation of how to use them? These are things that you should also consider. Will you have a section for prayers? You should have a section for prayers and affirmations. These can be prayers that you create yourself using the acronym that I have taught you, PRAY. These can be prayers that you find from other sources, prayers that you take from a religious text. I also want to take a moment now to explain or to let you guys know that the book Psalms is actually a grimoire. The book of Psalms is an example of prayers that are tried and true and effective. If you are in my mentorship program, then you know that we use the book of Psalms, and it was part of the required reading for our first 6-week session. The book of Psalms is very powerful, and it's an example of a grimoire, or in this case, a section of your grimoire that will contain powerful prayers that you have tried or created that you know are effective. How, under what conditions do you pray these prayers, for what type of ailment or situation, and whatever ritual would go along with them to make them most effective. This is a section that you must have in your grimoire. You want to have that addresses rituals. What type of rituals do you perform? When do you perform them? Do you want to separate the rituals by their purpose? Do you want to separate the rituals by when they are performed? So perhaps you'll have a section for full moon rituals. Perhaps you'll have a section for rituals that are performed during a solar eclipse. Perhaps you will have a section for rituals that are performed during the equinoxes. These are things that you should consider. You want to include in your grimoire any information that you have about your ancestors. So your ancestry and your interaction with the ancestors should be a section in your grimoire. You should record the names of the ancestors that you are familiar with, any names that you know of. Um, Feel free to omit those ancestors whose energy you do not want to conjure or interact with in any way, but you should have information about your ancestors in your grimoire. If you know of any special talents or accolades or accomplishments that your ancestors may have had, absolutely include that information. Include pictures and stories and anything else that you can remember. You should have an entire section devoted to your ancestors and any information or power that you can personally draw upon and those coming after you as well. You need to include in your ancestor section the rituals associated with working with your ancestors, the types of offerings that you give. When do you give these offerings, and what are the rituals that you practice in relation to the ancestors? You may want to have a section in your grimoire for signs, for seals and sigils. These can be sigils that you create yourself. These can be seals that you create yourself or seals that you get from another source, like the seals of King Solomon. You can hand render these. You can use photocopies that you paint or embellish. You can actually just cut and paste the Xerox copy. The level of creativity that you choose to apply is completely up to you. It's more about the information than anything. If you're going to have a section for seals and sigils, you need to discuss at length how these are used and the purpose that they are used for, the source of the sigils, and the source of the power that they tap into. If you're creating your own sigils, then you would need to break down and explain how the design was created, or at least what it is linked to and what it corresponds with, and the types of spirits or energies that it conjures and controls. If you're making your own seals and sigils, you want to make sure that you create a design that is clear and reproducible. It will do you no favors in the future, nor your descendants, to create a design that is extremely abstract and is difficult for any other person to reproduce. That would leave them with the only option of photocopying your sigil or your design, and then you get into issues about the safety of the book and the confidentiality of the information therein. So keep this in mind when you're creating magical seals and sigils. Is this something that can be reproduced and reused and understood and well executed by those coming behind you, or those that you choose to share your book with, or the information in your book with? Your grimoire should definitely contain information about correspondences that you draw upon for your magical practice. For example, the elements: earth, air, water, fire. You may want to include the orisha or spirits that correspond with those elements. You may want to include the crystals and herbs that you often rely or use that correspond with those elements. You may want to include correspondences for the days of the week. You may want to include correspondences for the astrological signs or celestial bodies. Other information you should consider adding to your grimoire or book of shadows would be information about the astrological signs. What are your experiences with each sign? What are your understanding about each sign? How do they interact with one another? How do you work with this energy? This is all information that you should include in your book. There should also be a section on deity, the deity that you personally work with. Who are they? What tradition do they arise out of? How do you interact with them? Is there a particular conjuring ritual that you use? And if so, a detailed explanation of that. How do you maintain your relationship with this deity? Do you leave offerings? If so, what are they? How does this deity work with you? What have been your successes and what are your challenges? This is information that you should record and keep up to date in your grimoire or book of shadows. You should make the distinction when discussing the deity that you work with, what tradition they arise out of. Do you work with the Orisha? Do you work with the Loa? Do you work with archangels or saints? Do you work with demons or astral spirits? You need to record this information and discuss at length what your relationship are with these energies. How do you contact them? How do you work with them? And things like that. You should have a section in your book for celestial events. What do you do for the full moon? What do you do for the new moon? How do the moon phases affect your practice? Do you have any type of ritual or work that you do for solar eclipses? What has been your experience or what is your approach to retrogrades? Is there anything that you do in advance of a retrograde to prevent the negative effects that retrogrades are known to have on people? All of this information should be included in a very detailed manner in your grimoire. What types of charms and trinkets do you create? You should have a section in your grimoire that discusses the type of, you should have a section in your grimoire that discusses the type of talismans and amulets you work with. Do you create them yourself? Do you have them created for you? What purposes do they serve? What materials are they made out of? How do you use them? Can they all be used together? Can they be used one at a time? These are all things that you should consider and record in your grimoire. You should have a section in your grimoire that deals with potions, lotions, and creams. What types of things do you make? What ingredients are used in them? What purposes do they serve? You should include a very detailed explanation of how these products are created, how they are stored, how the ingredients are handled, any type of incantation or blessing or charming ritual that coincides with the production of these products. This all needs to be recorded in your grimoire. You should have a section on crystals. What are your favorite crystals to work with? In what way do you use them? Are they included in recipes? Are they included in other works? Are they included in charm bags? Do you use them alone? And if so, for what purpose? What are your experiences with these crystals? And How do you store, care for, and protect them? You should include information about the elements and how you work with them, and any tools that you have that correspond with the elements. For example, the earth element. Do you work with dirt? And do you work with dirt from any specific site or location? Graveyard dirt, for example, bank dirt, dirt from a university or school, sand from the beach. You would want to specifically address each type of dirt that you work with and describe how you use it and how it's incorporated into your magical and spiritual practice. The same would be true for waters. Do you collect rainwater and how do you use it? Do you use thunderstorm water, water from a lake, water from the river, water from any other source, waterfall water? You want to describe the type of water that you're using, the type of work that it is used for, and your experiences and understandings about the power of that particular ingredient. You would also want to have a section on incense. Are you making your own incense? And if so, what type of incense do you make? Do you form them into cones? Do you just create loose herbal incense that are burned over charcoal? Do you incorporate resins? Are you making your own incense sticks? What about potpourri? Do you make potpourri? Do you use potpourri? And for what purpose are you using these items? So you would record both the recipe and a detailed explanation of how, when, and why these blends are used. Finally, when it comes to creating your grimoire, you want to think about what is going to happen to it once you have transitioned. Who are you going to leave it to? What will be your instructions to them? Are you going to create some sort of a charter or license, giving them authorization to only do specific things with your grimoire, to only share certain aspects of it? Who will be the guardian of your body of work once you have left the physical realm? You want to include this at the end or the conclusion of your book. This is a living body of work, and no man knows the day or the hour. However, we know that we will all become ancestors at some point. So you want to create your book with this in mind and build into it a charter or license for those individuals or individual that will come behind you and become the guardian of your book. You want to leave detailed instructions for how you want your book to be handled. How do you want it to be stored? Who do you want it to be shared with? If there is anything that is needed to be done to power your book. Should it be placed outside during a full moon for charging? Should it be placed outside during a lunar eclipse? Should offerings or feedings be made to your book? Are there spirits or energies synchronized and attached to your book? And if so, how are they fed and maintained? How is that power continue? How do you continue to keep that power source attached to the book itself? These are all things that you need to consider and make provisions for when creating your grimoire. If there is work that you haven't finished or understandings that you haven't quite understood, you want to leave space in your book for for those coming behind you to add on. If there are areas of study that you want to know more about, or areas that you were not able to master. Address those. And again, urge your descendants to add on to that body of work and to keep the book growing and evolving. I hope this information has been helpful to you. I hope that it will inspire and guide you as you begin to create your own grimoire or book of shadows.
If nobody talks about you, then you are nobody.